Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be forgotten.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Put chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello and welcome again to Occultae Veritatis. I am Ood Gallifrey.
I am Sage Murray.
And I'm Leon Filger.
Now today we're going to be talking about Mount Everest, what you need to do to get up there, and all the dead bodies that are laying in the world's tallest open grave.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that, but before we do, we have to do What's Your Poison?
So, what's your poison?
So, what's your poison?
What's your poison?
Alrighty, today I got a comment on Twitter that we don't do enough cannabis stuff, so here I am bringing it up. So today we're reviewing Sunset, which is an indica strain by Snoop Dogg, by his company Leafs by Snoop. It has a THC concentration of 26%.
Holy shit.
A CBD concentration of 0.07%.
That is not my kind of weed.
Nope. It is said to give you a mixture of effects, but the most noticeable will be physical. It'll leave you with a positive feeling and euphoric sedative effects creeping in. It's selected for a range of terpenes, which is the flavor elements, and it tastes kind of like a jar full of spicy peppers and cloves.
Cool.
So I have my trusty Buddha vaporizer here, because I think you can taste the flavor when you go through a vaporizer.
Me. Hope I'm not stuck here all night like that last time.
Oh boy.
Just take one little puff.
One little puff.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the cloves, but it does have kind of a piney taste.
Yeah, it's a good taste.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not harsh at all. Some of the ones when you bring them through the vaporizer, like some of the ones that have like diesel terpenes and all that, they can come off pretty harsh, but this is pretty easy.
Yeah, that was really easy. It tastes really good.
Alrighty. What do you guys want to give?
Well, I'm not high yet, so I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we continue this later?
Yeah, let's continue this later.
A few moments later.
I really like it. I don't feel like too high.
I took it real easy because I have to drive, and I think that was a good idea.
Yeah, I took it easy too, but I always do. But it was a nice one, and I liked the taste.
If I was at home and had more of this, I think I'd be in a better position to judge it.
Yeah. I've been smoking this for a while. I have back pain just because I'm a big guy with a big beer gut, and that pulls on my back quite a bit. But this really helps me like sleep at night, and it helps me, and it also makes Overwatch fun to play. So I get a bit of the head stuff and a bit of the body stuff. Nice. It's nice.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good.
A much clearer picture is emerging about the last hours of a Canadian woman's life on the slopes of Mount Everest. Shreya Shaw Clorfin died Saturday, shortly after reaching the summit. The result, one experienced climber suggested, of simple disorganization and maybe a little bad luck. Shaw Clorfin was one of about 300 climbers on the mountain last weekend. She was climbing the southeast ridge. Outside magazine reported Shaw and her Sherpas left Camp 4 around 8:30 Friday night. The ascent was slow, it was crowded. Shaw wound up stuck in what's called the death zone, where oxygen is scant for many hours. About 150 meters from the top, her Sherpas and other climbers urged her to turn around. She wanted to press on. Shaw made it to the top, but on the way down, in the area known as the balcony, her last bottle of oxygen ran out and she could not continue. Tonight, the company that helped Shaw Chlorfin get to the top is trying to determine whether it can recover her body. The CBC's Chris Brown has more on all this tonight. Chris.
Well, so far, Peter, this season, 10 climbers have died in the slopes of Mount Everest, and hundreds more are expected to make the attempt in the coming days. This is what it looks like when there's nowhere to go but down. The last ridge before the Everest summit, almost 9,000 meters up. Shreya Shah Chlorfin made it this far. A Sherpa later retrieved the camera from her body, along with this photo of her at the top. On the way down, she collapsed and died from exhaustion. One of her guides was Ganesh Thakuri.
Many people still were tired. The weather wasn't good, and there was lots of traffic. Many people didn't have enough oxygen.
It was climber congestion, and the delay proved fatal. Thakuri says the Toronto woman ran out of oxygen and didn't heed earlier warnings to turn back.
Myself, I asked her to go back and try next year or some other year, but she didn't listen.
I'm trying to get up to Camp 2 over there at the top of that big ice ridge.
Also making the summit that day were two Vancouver men, Sam Wyatt and Steve Curtis. They went up the opposite side of Everest from Tibet, the north, and saw the incredible lineup of people coming from the south side, some 300 climbers. Their route was less congested, yet still one of the men climbing with them that day died, Spaniard Juan Polodid. In his case, as with Shaw's, there have been questions about preparedness.
So today we are talking about Mount Everest. The indigenous Nepal people call it...
Nepalese? The indigenous people in Nepal, are they called like the Nepalese people?
Oh, I think that's appropriate. Yeah, the Nepalese people call it Sagor Matha, which means Mother of the Universe.
Cool.
Local Tibetan monks call it Chomolungma, which means Goddess Mother of Snow.
Whoa.
It is the height of 21 Eiffel Towers, which is 29,035 feet high, or 8,850 meters. And it's still growing. The plate that contains the Indian landmass is still pressing up against the Eurasian plate, so those mountains are still growing at a rate of 1/3 of an inch per year, or by about a foot every 36 years. Leon, how old are you?
I am 32.
Okay, so Everest has almost grown a foot since your birth.
Cool.
I've grown more than a foot since my birth.
Oh, sweet.
So, fuck you, Everest.
Yeah, you're beating Everest. Now, the first step to climb up Everest is to get in shape. Now, even though it's the tallest mountain in the world, Everest is described as a low-tech climb, which means that there is very little scaling of cliff faces and climbing straight up. It's mostly just willing yourself to put one foot in front of the other until you get to the top.
Wow.
So you are training for pure endurance.
Right.
Politics kept strangers out of Nepal and Tibet, and Mount Everest was not able to be explored by the Western world for quite a few years. You know, some after effects of colonialization had left some bad blood.
Colonization.
Yes,
and colonialism.
Yes, colonialism.
There you go.
Had left some bad blood, and fair enough. The British were kind of ramming their way into the rest of the world, and it left some bruised egos and some mistrust. But after a lot of negotiation and some promises made that were later broken, but whatever, Tibet...
broken.
Oh, yes. Tibet opened its borders and allowed explorers in 1921. Now, what do you need to scale the mountain? You need to buy the gear. So every climber going up to Mount Everest has to bring about 58 pounds of gear.
Oh, my God.
First are boots with crampons.
And for the love of God, don't buy it in Vancouver. Don't wait till you get to Kathmandu to buy it, because it's way the fuck more expensive there.
Oh, yeah. It's just like going to Disneyland and trying to buy a Coke. The Coke is $5 in Disneyland. Boots with crampons. So crampons are the little metal hooky things that you put on the bottom of your boots.
Okay.
And that allows you to grip into the ice. You want layered, windproof clothing. Windproof because the winds on Mount Everest can get crazy. You need a pair of goggles. You need goggles to cover up the rest of your face. You need some kind of balaclava to cover your skin, because when you get up to the highest peak, any exposed skin will freeze. And if you don't have proper goggles, the surface of your eyes will freeze. You need a climbing harness. So that's kind of a thing that goes over all your gear and has a bunch of hooks on them, and they can be linked together with a carabiner or have ropes strung through them.
Cool.
You need an ice axe. You need 2 sleeping bags, one rated -20 and one rated -40. Basically, the temperatures on Everest vary enough that you need to use the lower temperature one at lower temperatures and the higher temperature one at even lower temperatures. Because if you use the minus 41 in a warmer area, you'll begin to sweat because it's a bit too warm. And when you're in Everest, any sweat will turn onto ice on your skin.
Gross.
Oh, yeah. You need 2 tents. One big tent for all the base camps, and one tiny tent for all the tiny areas you're going to be trekking into. You also need cooking supplies and food. The food is high calorie, high sugar, because sugar takes less energy to digest. So it's all chocolate, cookies, and sweets.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, if you're smart, you won't do any of these things.
Mm.
You'll hire adventure consultants to do all the shit for you.
Yeah, yeah.
So you just... Mount Everest is such a slacky climb, and a lot of like Rob Hall, who is the CEO of Adventure Consultants, when John Krakauer wrote Into Thin Air.
Yeah.
He bemoans folks, a lot of like rich white people who show up, because it costs $90,000 to climb Mount Everest.
Oh, yeah.
Just for the pass to get up there.
Oh, my God.
And then paying an adventure company on top of that. There are a lot of like half-bit adventure companies as well there was a Canadian woman who died a few years back because the company she hired basically got her up to the top of the mountain and abandoned her there after they'd taken her money.
That was Shariah Shaw.
You bet. That was her. She had rented some climbing gear and did a photo shoot, and then raised money, and she died on the mountain, and I think they took her body down like 4 days after she had died there or something like that.
Yep.
But Mount Everest is really easy to climb, and so a lot of rich people like to do it, and a lot of the old timers like Rob Hall and the Adventure Consultants folks hate them.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can literally pay a Sherpa to carry your ass to the summit.
Mm-hmm. Besides that, so buying the gear yourself will cost about $8,000 to $15,000, depending on what quality you go with. If you're going to Everest, don't skimp out. Buy the expensive stuff.
Yeah.
It's your fucking life.
Right.
What all these travel companies and the people that go solo do is they usually hire a Sherpa. Now, people think that a Sherpa is a job title or a Sherpa is a type of profession, but Sherpa is actually an ethnicity of indigenous people that have been living at the bottom of the mountain for thousands of years.
And Sherpas confirm the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
Tell me why.
Because they've been living at the base of Mount Everest and within there, and their lungs have developed to absorb more oxygen from the air than other people.
Cool.
Which is why they're able to make it to the summit better than the foreigners that come before them.
And their lungs are actually larger compared to their overall body size than ours. They've evolved to have bigger lungs to function at higher altitudes. Really cool.
Yeah, so when foreigners are coming in and climbing the mountain and they're starting to wave out, the Sherpas are still going because their bodies are more acclimated to it. What else they know is they know what the mountain looks like and how the mountain changes. They're attuned to the weather of the area, and they're attuned to what signs you need to watch out for to get out of an area. And even on expensive travel companies, they usually hire a Sherpa or two for about $5,000 each to come with, because it's statistically proven that if you bring a Sherpa with you, you're more likely to live.
And you can send the Sherpas ahead to set up ropes, to set up camps and everything, and then everything's all nice and laid out for you when you get there. Yeah. Interesting thing about acclimation is that there are two ways to get to Mount Everest Base Camp. There is the 10-day hike, and there's the 1-day helicopter ride. Yep. And it's very, very strongly suggested that people take the 10-day hike, because during those 10 days, your body acclimates to the altitude and you're less likely to die on the mountain statistically than if you take the helicopter to base camp.
And in fact, some of the more extreme companies, I shouldn't say more extreme, some of the more responsible climbing companies will actually send you up to various points on the mountain and then back down.
Base camp 2, yeah. Yep. Up and you stay there for a day and then come back down, and then up to base camp 3 and then back down.
Yep. And your body is more likely to get adapted to it when you do that. Just to give you an idea of the way these Sherpas are acclimated to their environment, they hold most of the records surrounding Mount Everest. The most times climbed. I didn't find the last name for the Sherpa, but his first name is Apu.
His probably last name was Sherpa.
I think so. He climbed the mountain 21 times.
In fact, I can guarantee you his last name is Sherpa. Their last name is all Sherpa.
Oh.
It's like Singh when they're Sikh.
That's interesting. Okay, now I know.
Appa Sherpa.
Yeah. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yes!
The quickest ascent in 8 hours and 10 minutes was done by a Sherpa. The first climb in history was done by Edmund Hilary, which was a British explorer, and Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa. The most climbs without oxygen, so without the assistance of oxygen tanks, was 10 times done by Ang Rita Sherpa. And the longest time spent on the summit. Now, usually people only have a time, like 10 or so minutes.
Between 1 minute to a half an hour on a very, very good day.
Yes, to celebrate on the summit. Bubu Chiriri Sherpa stayed on the summit for 21 hours celebrating.
Wow, that's incredible.
The only record that I could find that the Sherpas didn't have was the oldest to climb the mountain. And that's held by Yurichoro Miura. She climbed the mountain at 80 years and 200 days of age. So the total for all this, so you have your 2 Sherpas, you have your equipment, and you have your flight insurance, and you paid the guide company. At basement bargain levels, this is going to cost you $65,000. And that's for like the bargain trip. And now actually climbing the mountain. It takes about 68 days to climb the mountain with only 21 days of actual climbing. The best month to go in is May. So actually this month.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't be released in May, but we're recording in May. The winds on Mount Everest can get up to 200 miles per hour or 320 kilometers per hour and have temperatures that dip as low as minus 71 Celsius. During the summer, it's monsoon season, so rain, hail, sleet, snow cover everything in ice, and it makes slipping and falling much more frequent. So usually there's a summit party of people going up in May because that's the best month to do it. But even in May, the winds are around 100 miles per hour or 130 kilometers per hour, and the temperature is about minus 35 Celsius. So even in May, in the best time of year, it's still pretty treacherous.
Right.
Yeah. So there's 15 routes up Mount Everest. We're going to study the safest route up. So this is the absolute safest, the least amount of fatalities, and this is what most travel companies go with. And that's
is it the Lhotse face?
Yes, that's the Lhotse face is part of it, and that's the southeast route. So you arrive in Kathmandu. You have about a 2-week...
In one of the sketchiest airports in the world because the runway is like bizarrely tilted in one direction. So you're flying uphill to land on the runway.
Oh, that would be trippy.
Yeah, it is trippy.
Yeah, so you spend about 10 days to 2 weeks hiking to base camp. So you could, like Leon said, you could take a helicopter right to base camp, but the much more suggested solution is to actually hike there because your body will get naturally acclimated to the lower oxygen conditions. When you arrive at base camp, they want you to stay there for a couple days just so the Sherpas can prepare your equipment and so you can get acclimated.
Because if you're going to get altitude sickness, it's going to be when you're at base camp because some people just aren't made for it.
Yep.
And there's a certain percentage of people who show up at base camp and get really fucking sick and get medevac, and it's just because that's how it is.
Yeah. Even at base camp 1, the oxygen in the air is about 2/3 regular. So you're already operating on 1/3 less oxygen.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So on this southeast trek, the first leg of the journey is the Khumbu Icefall. It's about 10-mile or 17-kilometer river of ice. So this is a giant glacier that is continually moving and traveling, and the edges of it are always scraping against the rock walls and churning and snapping and breaking. It's
different every day. Like the Khumbu Icefall changes every single time you go over it. And if you ever see like pictures and video, there's people with like shitty little aluminum extension ladders crossing crevasses that are hundreds of feet deep.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's sketchy.
Yeah, it's a glacier that's a couple hundred feet high, and it just cracks open in different places every day. And because the outsides of it move slower than the middle of it, the glacier just keeps on churning against itself. So you could be stepping on a piece of ice that has a drop 300 feet, and you won't even know it.
Why would people want to do this?
Yeah. So before you even get past the first base camp, before you're even beyond it, this is one of the most treacherous legs of the journey.
But without 2 small teams of modestly paid workers, things would soon start falling apart. One group is the so-called Icefall Doctors. This year, there are 6 of them.
Right above base camp here is the Icefall. It looks extraordinary. It's the most dangerous part of the whole route, and the Icefall Doctors who work in there, setting up the ropes for the other climbers to use, say that it feels like being an ant climbing over a huge bowl of popcorn.
This is Madan Kumar Rai's first season.
In this work, you gain a name. Everyone knows you, everyone sees your work, and everyone recognizes you as an icefall doctor.
He shot this footage for us when he went to work one morning.
We have to walk this dangerous path. There is guarantee of life here. We put these ropes down for people to cross, but we have to jump across them.
The icefall is created by a glacier flowing over a cliff, and it's always moving. The route has to be remade every day. Each season, they make around $5,000. That's less money than other Sherpas earn, who do more celebrated work, guiding climbers all the way to the summit.
Yeah, the glacial wall that makes up the Khumbu icefall is part of the fourth largest mountain. So you have to partially climb the fourth highest mountain in the world just to get up to base camp 2.
Wow.
Yeah. Also, the glacier scraping against the sides of this valley also cause frequent rock falls and avalanches. So that's also a thing in this area. So then you reach base camp 2. And if you're one of those responsible companies, you would then head back to base camp 1 and get acclimated to that. Next up is the Western CWM. It's another glacial valley. It's broad and flat and wide. So the Khumbu icefall is in this little tight valley where everything is cast in shadow. The Western CWM is this big, open, almost bowl-shaped glacier that's sitting there. And because of how it's surrounded by mountain ranges, a lot of solar energy gets reflected into the area.
Cool.
It's known as the kind steppe because the sunny day temperatures, in a sunny day without wind, all the reflected sunlight make that valley about 35 Celsius in temperature.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's but of course you can't take off any of your equipment because the cold air is still there. After the Western CWM, you reach the
Lhotse.
The Lhotse face. At the Lhotse face, the solar reflection quits. So just to give you an idea of what the Lhotse face is.
It's the fourth highest mountain in the world.
Yes, it is. Put your fingers up so you have a 2 and have your the back of your hand facing you. The Lhotse face is you climbing up the back of your wrist to get in between those 2 fingers.
Okay.
So you're getting at the base between Mount Everest and the fourth highest mountain in the world. So you're getting right at the bottom of that. So the temperature immediately drops back down to regular to about minus 30 Celsius because the solar reflection quits. And instead of walking a flat plane like you were before, you're climbing up a 50-degree wall. And it's a mix between snow and rocks. And it often changes day by day because the snow on the mountain is always moving.
And there's one rope, and you end up getting like sometimes 50 people piled up on this rope one at a time. You get one slow-ass motherfucker at the front who slows everyone down, and in some cases results in a lot of people dying on the same day because everyone gets stuck behind the slow-ass who dies. And that little bit when you're coming up the Lhotse face is where most of the bodies on Everest are laying.
Yeah.
And they actually use dead bodies as markers when you're going up the Lhotse face so people know where they can step and other bits where the snow is just disgustingly deep and you fall to your death.
Yeah, we'll get to that when we talk about green boots.
Sorry, I'm kind of jumping on your...
Oh, no. I love the discussion.
You guys are both Everest nerds.
Fact.
Then you get to the Geneva Spur, or the saddle rib. Basically, when you get to the bottom of the mountain, so if you get to that point between your 2 fingers again, you then have to start climbing up the ridge on your way up Everest. You're climbing up your pointer finger. So there's this little ridge that's sometimes knife-thin at points and sometimes wider, and you basically just have to climb this ridge all the way up. You're reaching elevations up to 60 degrees straight up, and basically you just got to hold onto this rope and put 1 foot in front of you over and over again. When you reach something called the Hilary Step, and it's named after...
Sir Edmund Hilary.
Yeah, Sir Edmund Hilary, the first man to summit it. That's when you reach the death zone.
Oh, damn.
So the death zone is where human survival is not guaranteed past 48 hours. Basically, if you stay in the death zone for more than 48 hours, without the cold, without any other factors, you will die of altitude sickness.
Wow.
Yeah, because your body will not be able to get enough enzymes.
Pulmonary edema.
Yep. Yeah, so the Hilary Step is this giant rock. So if you have your finger again and you're climbing up your pointer finger, imagine somebody taking a big wad of chewed gum and putting it on that ridge. The rest of the ridge is fairly simple to crawl across, but now you got this big 40-foot tall rock wall that goes straight up that you need to scale.
Yuck.
And this is when you're in the death zone, and the death zone has a third of the amount of the oxygen as what we're used to. And people say that it has to be easy because you're taking air tanks with you. But the reality is, if you brought enough air so that you have 100% oxygen the whole time, you would be weighed down severely and your chances of survival would go down. Mm-hmm. So you have to learn to live on less and less oxygen because you have to keep that constant balance. If I'm too heavy, I'll die. But if I don't get enough oxygen, I'll die. So you got to have that balance.
Those oxygen tanks aren't taking you down to sea level.
Yeah.
The ideal oxygen mixture they're going for takes you down to about 17,000 feet, which is sort of above which breathing becomes sketchy.
Yeah. Yeah, the balance comes to a place where you're really not getting enough oxygen for an extended period of time. And you have to climb a 40-foot straight-up wall on that.
With a bunch of slow-ass motherfuckers around you and only one rope.
Yeah, and they're all going up one at a time.
And coming down one at a time.
Yep. And it's also known as to be very treacherous because if you misstep or you don't hook your cord correctly, you have a 10,000-foot drop on one side, and you have an 8,000-foot drop on the other side. Both are fatal.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Why are people paying to do this? It sounds not fun or pleasant at all for me.
You have tattoos. Those hurt.
Yeah, but I don't have to carry 60 pounds of stuff and climb up ice walls.
It's kind of the same feeling, though.
I think it's just become a cultural meme. Like, this is something really hard to do, so I'm going to do it to prove I can do it. I think it's just people proving their own strength to themselves.
It's really like if you have a small penis, you need to climb Everest.
Yeah,
I have no need to ever do it.
There needs to be a study. Then you reach the summit. The summit is about the size of a 12-person dining room table. It's big enough to have about 3 or 4 people standing there at one time. Mm-hmm. So when you reach the summit, with a big group of people, they have to take turns doing their shots on the summit. People usually die on the way back down. There's something called summit fever that makes people keep on going. So the Sherpas will tell them, you don't have enough oxygen to make it back down. You're going to die if you do it. And damn it, they think that they just want to get to the summit, and they don't care if they don't have enough oxygen to get back down. They're going to try anyway, and they reach the summit, and then they die on the way back down.
Part of the problem, though, is when you get hypoxic like that, it affects your decision-making abilities. Mm-hmm. It's very much like being drunk when you have that little oxygen in your blood.
Oh, I guess, hey?
It's why the Sherpas have to be very attuned to who they're guiding, because the exact process in oxygen deprivation and exhaustion, just like Leon said, it forces even you to convince yourself that you're doing just fine. Even the early stages of hypothermia have a way of making you feel warm and comfortable, even though your body is dying.
Speaking of hypothermia, Google Beck Weathers.
Yeah.
The photo of him missing his entire nose is pretty freaky.
Oh yes, I'll put that up on. And once again, with all our things, I'll have just a slew of pictures to go with this, so you can see all the stuff I'm talking about. So make sure to follow either our Instagram or our Facebook or our Twitter if you want to see those.
And listeners, my God, if you want one hell of a read, please treat yourself to John Krakauer's Into Thin Air.
Oh,
it is a magnificent book.
Yeah, I think I have that book.
Read it, dude. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm going to read it again now, I think, when I get home.
Do it.
So just so I can cement why so many people die on Everest, I'm going to cement exactly the conditions they're under. First off, you're on reduced meals. You can't eat more than about 800 calories per day, even though you're exerting yourself like crazy, because if you eat any more than that, it'll put too much blood in your core, and the rest of you will start to get cold. So you have to keep on constantly feeding yourself tiny meals, because if you eat something that takes too much time to digest, it will make you colder, and that might just kick you into hypothermia.
Power gel.
Yep.
Christ.
You are on reduced water. All the water you have to drink, likely you have to bring it with you. In the early days of scaling Mount Everest, it used to be a thing you'd be able to scoop up snow and melt it.
Yeah.
But after years and years of commercialization, people have left enough garbage on the trails that all the snow around them is contaminated with rotting stuff or garbage or bacteria.
It's all yellow snow.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, so you either have to bring your water with you or you have to bring a water purifier. And both require more work than they're worth. So people end up drinking less water than they should. You're on reduced oxygen. We discussed that before. You're attuned to the oxygen at 17,000 feet, which is not the full amount of oxygen. If you're some American coming from like California, pretty much like 30 feet above sea level, probably where your house is, you're not going to do very well.
No, you're fucked.
Yeah. Even on perfect summer days, the winds get up to 100 miles an hour, or 130 kilometers an hour, and the temperatures are minus 35 Celsius.
Wow.
There are sudden changes in geology. One of the nicknames that the locals give to the mountain is the Confused Mountain, because it constantly changes and churns, and snow piles move. Even in perfect conditions, stuff happens. And also, you're sleep deprived. You have less time on the mountain to sleep, and the sleep you do get is reduced because you're in such a cold and unwelcoming environment that it's hard to get good sleep. Injury risk is high. If you hurt yourself a little bit to the point where you can't walk, say you twist an ankle or something like that, you're as good as dead if you're on the higher summits, because it's going to be too much effort to bring you down. Like, it starts to become a real-life trolley problem, because if you're high enough in the mountain, the Sherpas have to go, okay, if we put the extra effort into dragging his ass down the mountain, we might die too. So they have to do daily, like, little trolley tests. Should we risk it to save his life and risk all three of our lives?
And in absolutely perfect conditions, it's possible to get a helicopter to the summit. However, the air is so thin that the weight the helicopter can carry is to the point that on most days, the weight of an extra sick climber on the helicopter would mean the helicopter couldn't fly that high.
Yeah.
So if you can get your ass down to Camp 3, like, there's a fairly realistic chance of a helicopter evacuating you. But any higher than that, you're good and fucked.
Yeah, the tip of the mountain breaks into the stratosphere, so it's about a third as dense as on the ground. So that helicopter, if my aviation math is correct, it has like 1/3 of the pull weight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's literally the height that commercial airliners fly at.
With that in mind about how we gone over how deadly the mountain is, let's go into some of the more famous deaths on the mountain.
Yes.
Now, there have been about 2,400 people that have summited the mountain. About 250 people have died on the summit to the mountain.
Wow.
And we say about because we don't really know.
Yeah,
some just disappeared.
Yeah, some people just go missing. There's going to be several stories I tell here where it's going to end with, and he was never seen again, or she was never seen again.
That's wild.
Yeah, so about 1 in 10 people that attempt to climb the mountain die. So you have about a 10% chance of dying on your way up the mountain.
I do not like those odds.
Yeah. Arguably, one of the most famous body is Green Boots.
Yep, Green Boots.
Green Boots.
Now, Green Boots isn't on the trail.
Google it. It's intense.
It's not on the trail going up the southeast like we described before. It's on the second most popular trail on the south. He was used for years as a marker.
Oh.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah, he crawled into a cave and died.
Tsewang Paljor. There's no confirmation of this because his body was badly degraded when it was found, but he is theorized to be a member of a 6-person Indian climbing team. Basically, they got to Camp 3. The Sherpas requested that they go back down. The weather was worse than they were used to, and they thought the best option was to go back down. So 3 of this 6-man Indian climbing team went back down the mountain with the Sherpas. Tsewang Paljor and 2 of his associates decided to continue up the mountain. He was found in the cave with his green boots facing outwards. Yeah. The Sherpa said that he had summit fever, as they taught before. They were so close to the summit, and they spent a lot of money getting there, and they didn't want to give up. So even if they knew they were going to die, they still wanted to do it. He was used as a hiking marker for years, but a few years back, after some abuse and vandalization was done to the body, the Sherpas basically pushed his body over a cliff so he can have a more peaceful rest. So people won't, fuck with his body on the way up.
Who the fuck vandalizes a dead body?
Especially when you're on Everest. And
you got better things to do than vandalize a body.
That's seriously bad karma.
Yeah. And every second counts when you're up there and you're risking life, so why would you waste time fucking with the body? That was in 1996 that he was theorized to have died. The next one is 1998 with Francys Artesner. She wanted to be the first American woman to reach the summit on 0 oxygen. So she wanted to complete that. She made it. She made it to the summit, but on the way back down, under a mild snowstorm where visibility was at 0, she lost her climbing partner and husband. Basically, he made it down to the lower base camp and realized his wife wasn't there and that his wife was still out in the snow somewhere. Against the advice of all the people at the base camp, he grabbed a couple extra canisters of oxygen, some supply of food, and he wandered back up the trail to find his wife. He was never seen again, and his body was never recovered again.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. What makes this even more horrifying is on May 24th, so a few days later, climbers Ian Woodroll and Kathy O'Down passed Francys laying in the snow, dangling from her climbing rope. So she was kind of caught up in her climbing rope. She was apparently twitching.
So sad.
Oh yeah, she was apparently twitching and moving, and she was severely frostbitten, severely oxygen deprived, and constantly was murmuring, "Don't leave me, I don't want to die here. Don't leave me, I don't want to die here." They had to play the real-life trolley problem. They were near the summit. If they took time to rescue her, they would have to risk their own lives.
Oh.
You know, adding another 150 pounds of weight to your gear is a death sentence, especially when you're that high.
Mm-hmm.
And next up is somebody that died right beside Green Boots, and it actually sprouted a big debate in the climbing community. So David Sharp, he was a British mountaineer, so he was a professional climber, and he had climbed Mount Everest 3 times before without oxygen. He reached the summit the 3rd time. On his way back down the mountain, he sat to rest beside Green Boots. So he was tired, he was exhausted, he sat down to rest beside Green Boots. That's something that the Sherpas never recommend. Never sit down because he may never move again. Apparently, while he was sitting there, 40 climbers passed him. And as the 40 climbers passed him, he began to get more and more worse. First, he was having full-out conversations. Then people heard cries for his help. And then people heard him murmuring. And then at the end, he curled up his knees near his chest and put his head between his knees and was frozen solid and died beside Green Boots. There's something that's known as the Unwritten Climber's Code, and it's to help those in trouble. If you're going on a trek, if you're climbing a mountain, you have to help those in trouble. In the climbers community, there's kind of an attitude that Everest is too dangerous to take upon that attitude, and it's partly justified because...
Yeah, it sounds like it.
You're under such treacherous conditions, but the fact that 40 people passed him...
On the morning of May 14, 2006, a group of mountaineers were shocked to find another climber, frozen but still alive and sitting next to Green Boots.
Coming across someone stricken, whipped away by the harshness of the environment, it was horrible. It's the worst thing I've seen in my life.
Believing there was nothing they could do, they decided to leave the stricken man and carry on.
It's a hard thing to explain, but that's the hard calls that you sometimes have to make in mountaineering.
He described to me a man that was pretty much dead, and then Max comes along and says, "Oh no, he's come alive again."
More than 30 people walked past the stricken man that night, and yet a double amputee, Mark Ingalls, was the only one blamed for not helping him.
The hardest thing is to think that people think that you would walk past a dying person and not help them if you could.
He was a human being. Their aim is to get to the summit, and the welfare of anybody on the way is just too bad.
Now, we can't create barriers or walls of cotton wool where we can all go there safely and come home alive. People don't find that challenging enough.
People die. This is the cold, hard facts of life at 8,000 metres. You're in the death zone. It's a graveyard up there.
Yeah, Edmund Hilary was still alive in 2006, and he commented on what happened there, and he was horrified to learn that 40 people passed him. I guess he came from a more... I don't know, he came from a time where that climber's code...
Honor was more important than getting to the top.
Yeah. So it brought into question, like, how bad do these people need to get to the top? They could have helped him and brought him back down to base camp. They would have sacrificed their attempt to get to the top.
Right.
So they had to decide which is more. And that's a debate that's still raging today. Actually, you just brought up the next picture.
George Mallory.
George Mallory, yes. He was one of the first people to attempt to climb Everest. He never made it to the top, but in his attempt, he went missing, and he was missing for 75 years.
75 years.
Until he was found in 1999.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so in 1924, he tried to ascend, and he was lost forever, or so they thought. They found his body at the bottom of a crevasse, and he had rope ligature marks to his torso and to his legs. And he still had his climbing rope attached. And also he had a big hole in the front of his head. So what people thought, or what the, I guess, investigators thought, is one of his climbing mates went over the side of the mountain and fell, but they were still attached to him. So he was violently yanked off a mountain. And those were the ligature marks that tore open his torso.
Oh my God.
And they think on the way down, falling down the cliff, some sharp, jagged rock punctured right into his skull, killing him instantly. So really that fall gave him a quick death. So he's one of the lucky ones. He is known for having his shirt torn off just from years of the weather degrading his shirt. And he has a back that looks like rock. That's how long he's been frozen for. In 1934, another early death was Maurice Wilson. This is the... I don't know if deaths can be funny, but this is the funniest one. Aimed with a Bible and minimal gear, he had no crampons, so he had no ice climbing shoes. He had no oxygen. He had no axes. He had no climbing gear or rope. When the Sherpas basically told him, no, you're going to die, he said, my faith in the Lord will protect me. And he ascended up the summit many times, and every time he had to be rescued by the Sherpas, and he didn't make it very far at all. One time he snuck out, and he tried one more time, and he died, and he was found 1 year later. He was surrounded by his tent, which was set up wrong.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so this guy with minimal gear, minimal clothes,
no training,
decided that his faith in the Lord will get him up the mountain. It did not. In 2001, Marco Siffredi, after reaching the summit, Marco wanted to complete another goal. He wanted to be the first person to shred down the north slope of the mountain on a snowboard.
Oh, what an idiot.
Despite the Sherpas telling him not to, he decided to go down anyway, and he was never seen again. Apparently there were some sightings of a man on a snowboard way far away from the site he began at. So he might have made it quite a ways before he died, but he still died in the end. His body has never been recovered. A death of somebody from NASA is next. Dan Fredinburg was climbing Everest and recording it for a new project called Google Adventure Team. So Google Adventure Team is like Street View, but for adventures. So they go to the tops of mountains, and they explore hiking areas, and they go to the bottom of the ocean. Basically, if you can't afford to go on a vacation, Google will do it for you.
Cool.
Yeah, so he was trying to capture a street view of all the way to the summit. Like I said, the confused mountain decided that that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Even though it was May, and even though it was in the middle of spring, and even though the weather should have been stabilized, a 7.8 earthquake caught everybody off guard. It triggered an avalanche on Everest, killing 19 people. Killed 10 Sherpas, 5 climbers, and 4 people were never identified. Dan Fredinburg and the 2 people from his Google team were among the dead. So Google tried to map the mountain, and their team got killed on the way.
In that freak avalanche, or earthquake.
It's really quite dangerous.
Oh, yes. Yeah, who knew going to the top of the world where humans were not meant to be is sort of fucked up.
Well, there's a reason the Sherpas don't live that high.
Yeah. The Sherpas live near base camp 1, like on that level. Next up is Yasoko Namba. She was a Japanese climber, and she was very accomplished in her climbing. She completed what's known as the 7 summits. So that's climbing the highest summit on each of the continents.
Wow.
Those include Everest in Nepal, Aconcagua in South America, Denali in Alaska, Kilimanjaro in Africa, Elbrus in Russia, Vinson in Antarctica, and Puncak Jumapa in Indonesia.
Cool.
And how she died, it's unfortunate, but it's kind of poetic. So Everest was the last on her list. Everest was the last thing she had to get the 7 summits. She completed the journey, so she made it to the top of Mount Everest, only to succumb to a severe blizzard on the way down the mountain. So a severe blizzard changes that minus 35, 100 mile per hour wind into a 200 mile per hour, minus 71. So everybody on her team was just taken off guard by this massive blizzard, and they just never made it down.
God.
I don't know. Part of me thinks that if there was an afterlife, she'd be kind of happy that her body lay on the mountain after completing her 7th summit.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'd want to live more, but it's kind of poetic how she ended up. Karl Gordon Henize. He was an astronaut and a scientist set to test a NASA device. So NASA sent him with a device in 1993. They wanted to know how radiation affected people in higher altitudes, because there's less air to protect you from the radiation, so you get more radiation. So they sent him up with a device, and they wanted him to put that device as near to the summit as he could, because the top of Everest breaks into the stratosphere, so it's above our normal level of atmosphere, so it's useful to study up there. He succumbed to high altitude sickness, so his body was just not acclimated to the mountain, And he slowly had his lungs fill up with fluid, and when you get colder and colder and you work on less and less oxygen, your body's enzymes that keep you alive and keep your metabolic processes in order, they stop working. Because there's an optimal temperature range that all your enzymes work. And if you go outside of that, your body begins to just not work anymore, and you begin to die. And especially if there's a lack of oxygen. So he succumbed to high-altitude sickness.
Pulmonary edema is a condition caused by excess fluid in the lungs. This fluid collects in the numerous air sacs in the lungs, making it difficult to breathe. In most cases, heart problems cause pulmonary edema.
Yeah.
However, high altitude will also cause it.
Yeah. It's drowning without drowning. And you're drowning in your own body's fluids. So we're going to end with the 2012 death of Shariah Shaw, who's a Canadian.
Very sad.
Yeah.
It's an adventure decades in the making. When Shariah Shah Chlorfine was 9 years old, she went on a helicopter ride with her parents in Nepal that took them towards Mount Everest's glorious peak.
I remember the view. That was just the sunlight, just about like 50 feet. I can watch the summit of the Mount Everest, and it was like breathtaking, the view. And I was thinking one day I will do that. It's about like $71,000 only, Canadian dollar, is only for the expedition, plus the equipment's expense and the food and tips and all that. So about like $100,000 expense.
At 32 years old, Shariah is in top peak condition. She works out around 6 hours a day, a combination of martial arts, cardio, and strength training.
Morning time is a martial art, evening time is mostly cardio, push-ups, all kind of thing like muscles and abs. Also for the practice, I have been carrying 45 minutes to an hour and a half. I carry a 45-pound backpack. I walk pretty much up and down because Rogers Road to Eglinton, it has a hill down and up. That gives me pretty much practice. So it's, I would say average-wise, 6 hours workout every day.
And then there's the mental preparation.
Just can't wait to get there and just to risk Canada's flag. That's all I can see myself doing.
Basically, she was determined as hell. She was in wicked shape, but she was unprepared for the mountain. And really, there wasn't enough oversight, and there wasn't enough, I guess, preventative measures taken to either stop her or make her aware of the fact that she may not have what it takes.
It's because she picked one of the shit, like, fake adventure companies that took her money, took her to the top, and left her there.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was... The Sherpas were actually not local Sherpas. They were just...
They weren't even real fucking Sherpas.
Yeah, they were just some guys from Colorado.
Like brown fellows they found and said they're Sherpas. They had no experience climbing the mountain.
Because it was cheaper.
Yeah.
And they've scaled, like, mountains before, but this is like tiny rocky mountains.
Yeah.
Like where the temperature on top of the peak of the mountain is the same as on the bottom of the peak of the mountain.
Shorts and a t-shirt. That's very different.
Yeah. And basically, she was brought up. They didn't keep track of her oxygen correctly. And she got to the top. She celebrated up there. And on the way down, she died.
That's wild.
And she died slowly and painfully, begging for help while person after person after person passed her and did nothing.
Yeah. And it's the same trolley problem. Like, do you risk your life to save hers, or do you make sure that yours is in hold?
And what was it, like 4 days later that they were finally able to get her body down?
Yeah. Yeah, they draped a Canadian flag across her, and she sat there for a while, and eventually her body was brought down. She was actually born in Nepal and moved to Canada. So but she didn't have the local acclimatization to the oxygen. She had what evolution did, but she didn't have the environmental factors to make their lungs even more prone to it.
Right.
They considered for a while leaving her on there, and I think her husband had paid for her to come back.
Mm-hmm.
He was some sort of bigwig in something.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it was shocking. In preparation for this episode, I watched a documentary. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but it horrified me because it had a twist ending. It was about Shariah, and they followed her on her journey, and they followed her vlogs before, and the little videos she took, and like the fun little moments, and the selfies she took at base camp, and all that shit. And
she was pretty fucking stoked to be there.
Yeah, and she was excited and happy, and I didn't know she was going to die. This is before I started my research on this, and I was just... And the twist ending came when they introduced it with like, and things took a turn, and she made it to the summit, but things took a turn on the way down. It's like, oh man, maybe she's going to lose a couple toes. No, she fucking died.
Oh my god.
Hit me like a freight train. Because they let you get to know her throughout the documentary.
I've seen the documentary. It's very much recommended.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put it on the notes. But yeah, that's, of course, something that is affecting Everest to this day is commercialization is starting to blur the lines. Like, you look at Everest today, and there's lines of hundreds of people waiting to get up. It's like lines at an amusement park.
Yeah, it very much is. And I think it's the bad spirits are out when it gets to that point. I mean, if you're a believer in the Buddhist tradition, that you're pissing the mountain off. Lhotse is an angry god, and she doesn't like you littering on her.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really a shame. Like, I remember that one of the big things that were stopping the Nepal people from bringing, I guess, Westerners in to explore the mountain is they were afraid of disrespecting the mountain, disrespecting nature. But then they started to see the benefits of tourism. And now the people there have to fight between, do we kill our local economy or do we keep the mountain pure?
Yeah, which is a tough decision.
Lately, there have been more efforts to bring garbage down from the mountain. Like, they've launched expeditions specifically for bringing shit off the mountain.
Yeah.
But the amount of shit up there is just like oxygen bottles and trash and dead bodies and human waste. It's because there are no outhouses on the way up there. You just throw your shit where it falls.
Yeah. And not to mention dead bodies. And something to leave this off with. There's been so many dead bodies on the mountain that when you get to the summit, your view is of something called Rainbow Valley. And that's the southern face of the mountain is littered with the bodies of dead climbers. And because usually ski outfits are brightly colored so you can find them easier, there's bright blues and reds and greens and pinks all over. And it's known as the Rainbow Valley because the bodies of the dead lay across the face of the mountain and they're stark against the white of the snow and the black of the rock. Anyways, now we move into deep questions.
Okay.
My deep question for this is, should we have respect for the dead? Some of us took shots at some of the people that are in here because honestly, some of them made dumb decisions, especially the guy that climbed up with just his Bible in hand and taught the faith of the Lord. So I guess, when is it appropriate to make fun of the dead?
As someone who works in palliative care professionally, I think you can usually... First of all, you should definitely make fun of death. That's something to be poked at.
Yeah.
I say don't dishonor the dead. I mean, what do I mean by that? I think if you die on Mount Everest, you kind of had it coming.
Yeah.
It's like when a cage fighter gets beat to death. Yeah.
Well, you kind of like you know what you're getting into.
There's a 10% chance you're going to die on this thing. Those are pretty like reasonable odds you're going to die.
Yeah.
So no, fuck you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, part of me wants to have respect for the dead because, you know, I've been to funerals and I don't want my loved ones being made fun of, but part of me sees it as kind of an escape of bad deeds. Like, all your bad deeds are suddenly erased at death.
If I climbed Everest and died, I would expect to be made fun of.
Yeah.
In climbing, as if I die, people are going to talk shit about me, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Or don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like, I think you have to take it with a little bit of humor, like kind of like dark gallows humor, that some human bodies are used as place markers here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like some politicians out there, when they die, somebody forgets all the bad decisions they made. I think that your bad decisions should follow you into death.
I danced on John Diefenbaker's grave.
Oh, goody.
Quite literally. I pulled my car up to his grave. I blasted the sound system. I was playing Beatles medley by Stars on 45.
Oh, that's
and I danced on his grave.
Yeah. Did you shuffle?
I did.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Anyway. I think that's covered. So I say that you should have respect for the dead as much as you have respect for the life.
Yeah.
I think that people should have the same amount of respect. And if you lived a good life, you deserve a good death. And if you lived a shitty life, death should not be an escape from it.
Right.
Is that a bit harsh?
No, I'm good with it.
It sits all right with me.
Yeah. And of course, listeners, if you ever disagree, just feel free to go on the website, send us a voicemail, send us an email.
And some dick pics.
Oh, yes. From Occultae Veritatis. I've been Uda Gallifrey.
Sage Murray.
Leon Filger.
Love you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Have a wonderful evening.
Over the mountain, across the sea, there's a girl
Alrighty, welcome to the after show once again. And a big thank you to the 1950s R&B artists Johnny and Joe and their song Over the Mountain Across the Sea. I thought it'd be nice to end this episode of Death with a love ballad. For those of you that have been with us from the start, you know that it's been mostly just oohed by meself. I said that weird.
Myself.
It's been oohed by meself on the after show since nearly the beginning, and I've said thank you to each and one of our lovely patrons, but we have 3 people on this podcast, and I feel that Sage and Leon deserve a chance to thank all the patrons that we have themselves. So here's a list of Patreon names, if you guys would like to read them out.
Yeah. Okay, I'll read the first. Allison Lewis, Austin Durham, Brandy Matthews, Brent Brooks, Caitlin, who is my brother.
Oh, yeah.
Cambo, Carmen Finnegan, Charlene Missouri, Courtney J. Murphy, Crystal Mayfield.
You know that's right.
Ian Moen. We love you so ridiculously much.
Jessica, the rock-ass Jurgen.
Yeah.
Joshua, the fuck you up Nichols.
Oh, yes.
Kate, the Kate. Kayla Horn Dimitrik, Kim Horn, Leon fucking Filger, Lisa Scheffler, Nicola Gaskin, Peter Kleeman, and Rachel Hayes.
We love you!
And finishing off, Jack Hutchings. Jack, you're our boy, man.
We love you, Jack.
Jay Ford, thank you very much for contributing.
Thanks, Jay.
Jen Markowski. Jesse,
I know Jen.
Jesse Gray.
I love Jessie!
Oh, yeah. The original 666. She's the reason that I made that 666 level, and she's doing a fantastic job running our Facebook group, which you should all join.
Yeah,
she's amazing.
Yeah.
And she's also like the most cool chick I've ever met.
Oh, yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you met her in person?
No, I wish I had.
You know all those people that say like, "Oh, America's getting fucking horrible. I'm gonna move away and have a happier life."
She moved away.
Yeah, and has a happier life.
And she's amazing.
Yeah.
Where's she from now?
She lives like in Northern Europe, like one of those cool
worse.
countries.
Yeah.
I forget which exact one.
Jessica Reinstein. Amy Hura.
I know Amy.
Oh, yeah.
I love you, Amy.
And Roseanne Sinclair Stoltz. Thank you very much.
Love you, Roseanne.
Yeah, so thank you very much for contributing. You know, it's kind of silly giving money to a little indie podcast like ours, but you know, podcasts are becoming more popular, and I think this is really one of the mediums of the future, I think.
Seriously, like, it makes a huge difference. Every dollar makes a huge difference to us, and we're able to get better and better, because one day we will release the first episode about gnomes and dragons and spiky dicks.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and you will hear about it, and you'll be like, thank God I gave money to these fucks, because that was terrible.
Also, because of your Patreon donations, I was able to buy a fancy-ass shit beer instead of Bud Light.
Yes, no Bud Light from Mr. Sage Murray. No shitty fridge beer for this girl.
Yeah, so I know we fuck around a lot, but really from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for giving us money every month. We don't know why you fucking do it, but we're sure as hell glad you do.
We are.
I've got a rubbish government job, really, that I only go to because I need to, and every third week sitting down with these guys to record a fantastic podcast is really what keeps me going.
It has literally made my life better. My mental health is so much better now that I have this outlet to be able to hang out with these fucking weirdos.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Who knew talking about weird things would be so good for the soul?
It's super cathartic.
Yeah. From the very bottom of my heart, thank you so very much for making this dream possible for us.
That's right.
And just as a side note, if you think the shit we do now is stupid, wait until we make enough money to do this for a living. You will not believe the level of stupid we will get to.
Once there are 100 of you motherfuckers, we are going to spray me in the face with mace. So sign up your friends if you want to hear
And
that.
I'll likely get a tattoo of our logo somewhere of your choosing. I don't really care where.
Yeah, and
my body is your canvas.
And I've decided my 100 patron thing. I will get hit by a taser.
Cool. Okay, taser.
And poop my pants, probably.
Mace, and mine's a big wiener one, because I already have tattoos. But I'll get a tattoo.
Yeah.
Let's both agree that we have to take a bunch of laxatives, and right when we're about to shit ourselves, that's when we take the mace and the stun gun.
And I get to shoot you?
Can we put a pin in that and discuss it after the show?
Yes, we can.
And just so you guys know, if you didn't hear your name among the patrons, but you are part of our Patreon, it's because we record our after shows. Now that we record them together, they're about 3 weeks behind. So we'll be coming up with an updated episode, and you too will hear your name on the podcast. And if you want to contribute to the podcast, if you want to be one of the people that contributes to our tomfoolery, just send pledge of whatever you want, really, at www.patreon.com/ovpod. Plus, there's a few extra videos on there if you want to see us fuck around with Scientology and tests and looking at dick pics. So if that interests you, just www.patreon.com/ovpod. Wonderful, thank you. So with the after show, I've been Ud Gallifrey.
Siffredi!
Leon Filger.
Love you, bye.
Bye-bye.